It's Chit Chat with Manoj. It's interesting just how many viewers love this segment. I myself am hooked onto it. The host is Mr. Manoj Singh, who is the CEO of Caesar Productions. What's Mr. Singh's take this week? Let's discover together.
Welcome to Chit Chat with Manoj. I'm Manoj Singh. Hello, Adab, Namaste. Today we are going to talk about very diverse topics like cultural, social, political. So I'm calling this episode Analyze This. And joining me for this discussion today, I'm very lucky that he could find some time and come here on the studio, is Dr. Shahzad Rahman.
Hello.
Welcome. He's a practicing MD psychiatrist. He graduated from Patna Darbhanga Medical College. Thereafter, he completed his psychiatry specialization from Brown University, very prestigious university, and he was in their faculty for 20 years. Thereafter, he moved to George Washington University in their faculty. And so welcome, Shahzad.
Thank you.
So what are you doing now? And tell us a little bit more about your specialization.
Well, these days I'm basically working with a research company that is in the process of testing medication for larger pharmaceutical companies for medications that will come to the market 2 or 3 years down the road. Mm-hmm. So currently we are working on medications that treat insomnia, attention deficit disorder, bipolar disorder, difficult to treat depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. And I also have a small private practice with a group of friends in Arlington. So I see a few patients for basically, which is a psychopharmacology practice. Mm-hmm. But mainly my work is with what you would call commercial research.
Yeah, the drug testing and trials.
That's right, clinical trials.
Clinical trials,
yes, yes, of course.
So I'll start with the lighter questions. You traveled recently, and I noticed, and you had gone to all these Middle Eastern countries, UAE, then Turkey, and Lebanon and Egypt.
Yes.
What is going on over there? What do they feel about the U.S. policies and also the upcoming elections? I think you got a good feel of it.
Well, I think one of the things that people are concerned about here, with that one hears about, that why do they hate us? Mm-hmm. But that was completely missing when I got there. In Lebanon, when I asked the immigration officer what would be my visa fee, he said, no, you're American, we are friends, no visa fee for you. I felt the same things in Istanbul and Cairo. As soon as people knew that you were from America, suddenly they became more friendly, they wanted to talk, they wanted to learn more about it. So I think that that's one thing that I found. The other thing that people repeatedly told me, that Cairo, Beirut, or Istanbul are safer than Amsterdam or Prague. Because if there is some terrorism that we read about on the paper or see it on the TV, that's about most of the homicide for the year that you will get for these places. In places like Cairo, which are poor, there's not even much pickpocketing or purse snatching or things like that, which you might encounter in Milan or Florence.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. In Italy, there is a little bit of petty crimes.
So overall, I came back with very positive feelings about all of it. Istanbul is like New York City. It's very cosmopolitan, and I was surprised that Beirut was such a handsome city when rebuilt. So I'd heard that in 60s, etc., Beirut was the Paris of the East, etc. It's actually still Paris of the East, and it's still a very handsome city. Very wonderful,
nice.
very patrician and sophisticated people.
Any comment on the present presidency of Obama or the upcoming elections?
I think people over general like Obama very much, and they're somewhat alarmed by some of the Republican nominees' appeal to the base. And that appeal alarms them, but they are able to understand, they're sophisticated enough that they understand that these nominees may not mean it all so much. People were joking about not allowing Muslims to enter USA while it was being looked at. They thought that that Trump, for example, did not mean it. He was just saying it to appeal to his base.
I guess a political statement,
Yes, of course.
politically correct, I guess. So you have been catching up on your reading also, and we talked about it. So one of the interesting questions, of course, it comes up is, can money buy happiness, or does financial well-being has co-relationship with happiness?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's interesting to me. I have a number of relatives and friends who are economists, and they have interest in behavioral economists. So that's at the junction of behavioral economy and psychiatry or psychology. The answer in one word is yes, to a certain extent. But once you go beyond a certain level, there's law of diminishing return. For example, money buys you food, clothes, shelter, etc. And suppose you're a single mother whose car broke down, and if you don't have any money to fix it, you're going to be unhappy. So that's one way to look at it. The other thing is that people who have a more disposable income, if they give it away or spend it on someone else or experiences rather than material. So in other words, my reading suggests that buying a TV or a fancy car doesn't buy you as much happiness as buying an experience would, or sharing that money with someone else who may be in need. So these are some of the things. The other thing is that if you look at the happiness index, Denmark has been repeatedly the #1 country in happiness. And a lot of happy
And what was the reason for that?
Basically, people have a lot of safety net. So when people are not worried about food and shelter and clothing and healthcare, etc., they generally tend to be freed from worries. And freedom from worries is obviously going to make you happier.
Yeah.
And a country like India, for example, fell below in happiness level and percentage of suicide, which is a very crude indicator of happiness. So, for example, the suicide rate is higher in India than, say, in United States.
Yeah, okay. I think I can relate to that. I mean, it makes sense. I think so. You the countries like all Norway, Sweden, Denmark, France, where they have a more socialistic perspective and government provides a lot of benefits. I think then your worries go down. And in France, it's very hard to lay off people.
Right.
So I guess that must be related.
Some articles have suggested that up to $75,000 a year of income, happiness level rises. Beyond that, the correlation is minimal.
Oh, okay.
So
then it's from within happiness.
So yes. So I think that as public policy, when we talk about in political arena and things like that, that basically when people are happier, they're going to be more peace-loving, etc. I mean, this, of course, is my speculation on this. So there is a good, valid medical, psychological reason to provide people with sufficient safety net, and that's the argument for that.
Okay. The next question is very interesting. It came up actually in our own home during this Thanksgiving holidays, and this was what our second generation children observed. But I knew it from before, and I've also observed it among my friends and family. So they were asking me why South Asian men do not show publicly or in home affection, like they will hug or say "I love you" to their wife or their children. Or even parents. What could be? What do you think? I think it's a little bit cultural the way we were brought up. But what else could be the reason? But some of the first generations have been living here for 30, 40 years.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have heard that mores and behavior might have progressed more in India than some of the people who came here in 70s and 80s, and things have moved on in India somewhat. Also, I think that we often are multi-generational. Often we have parents and children. We like to do family things. So, culturally, we are very conservative people. And often I hear that, well, how could people who are responsible for Kama Sutra and Khajuraho could be so conservative? I don't know what happened in the interim, maybe the Victorian morals, but we are conservative and family-oriented people, so it makes us uncomfortable to have
Is it a male ego, or is it something that a male looks weak if he does hug his wife or children and say, I love you, or he wants to maintain this aura or status of strictness or something?
I think there's some of that, because I think that traditionally father knows best mentality still prevails, and a strict, upright father cannot possibly be very much touchy-feely. So there's some of that, I'm sure.
Well, I am not one of them. I always hug my wife and children and always
Good.
telling them.
Yeah,
love.
you can always sort of,
Yeah, and I want the same actually from them. I feel secure.
Of course.
Okay. Talking of Kama Sutra, and next is a good question. Another interesting observation fact is, why do South Asians have hard time talking about sex? It's considered like a taboo. Like first generation Asians who have been living here for so long. Second generation, I think, is adapting more to Western culture. So they are, and we know our children are being taught sex in school education, and starting from 8th grade. And then college and everywhere, and they are actively also sexually active way much earlier than we used to be in India.
Yes, I mean, some of it again goes back to our being conservative by nature, and I think that some of it is also related to the freedoms that you have. We live in a crowded society. Imagine a couple kissing and showing public display of affection, or talking freely about sex on a crowded bus in Delhi. I mean, that would be almost inadvisable to a certain extent.
Correct.
So
that I understand, because the whole environment is like that very repulsive. What about here?
Well, I think it does take some time and then effort, because some people make an effort, and it's learned behavior. So there's nothing particular about the South Asian genes or even the culture is adaptable. As I was saying earlier, that some of my nieces and nephews are surprised when they meet Indian students from India as to how evolved they are in these matters. And but again, that is also a matter of class. So if you belong to a certain class, and they generally have within their private domain, they have a little more freedom. So so I think to a certain extent, people have grown up feeling constrained by families and the larger society in general, and it's very difficult to sort of to break out of that mold.
Okay. So that's interesting. So the next question is, why do well-to-do or accomplished South Asians have an ego? Like they have two-sided behavior. They have within among our own society, they will have an uptight nose that I'm an entrepreneur or something like that, or I'm a doctor, this and that. But then they are completely different. They switch to another behavior when they're talking to non-South Asians like whites or some American, I would say. I mean, we are Americans too. We are U.S. citizens. Is there a reason for that? I mean, I have some theories. I mean, what I believe.
Well, I would like to hear that.
I feel like most of us, I mean, I don't know about, I wouldn't generalize anything. We were brought up in lower middle class. My father was a professor, my mother was a professor. We didn't have much money, and then suddenly when we arrive here, sort of I made it. I've now a big bank account, and I drive a Mercedes. I have a big car, and if I'm educated, it also comes from the class system of India.
Yes.
Looking down on people who didn't do well or a lower caste. I think it's something all related, and that carries on here, and seems like people look up to rich people or people who have made it, meaning they have become doctors or IAS officers or something, and But I won't generalize it, because there are people who are very nice as well, even if they reach somewhere.
Yes.
I met people like, famous directors like Shyam Benegal, totally down to earth.
Yes,
And very nice to everyone, giving time to everyone. So some, I guess, are like that.
Yes, I've heard the same thing about Shashi Kapoor, for example, that people have told me. I think India is a very hierarchical society. I mean, South Asia in general. And, some of that comes from caste, some of that comes from income and education and other things. There's an English-speaking India, and then there's Hindi-speaking Bharat. So all these factors come into the play. The other thing that I think is more universal, though, is that people who are very successful, many of them have done that by being somewhat ruthless to climb up. So some of that may be more universal rather than a particular Indian trait. So I think, again, that changes with personal evolution and learning about oneself, but you do hear that some people are sort of kiss up and kick down mentality.
Correct.
Yes,
They build a cocoon sort of around them, and they are quite reserved. They don't know. They mix with their own either up who has done better than them, or but then I come across people, you read about Bill Gates. He's very down to earth. He will walk up to you and talk to you and doesn't show. I mean,
well, you see, India hasn't finished doing its social climbing yet. It's still a poor country, relatively speaking. So obviously, there's a lot of clawing going on. I think once it reaches a middle income status, then things will begin to change. I suspect. But right now, it hasn't reached that status, and a lot of social and economic climbing is yet to be done. And some of that you see in individual behavior, I believe.
Correct.
But some of that are has to do with social psychology of Indians.
It's interesting. So good summary question I wanted to ask is, it's all about change then. Why do some South Asians adapt easily to change? They come here and to a new environment, like we say, be a Roman in Rome, norms, and some do not. What's the psychology behind it? Who have even come here for 30, 40 years? Is there a connection with the more traveled you are, the more education you have, that you become more open-minded? Or is it the behavioral, like we do Myers-Briggs test, some just remain inward? And
yes, I think it's a bit of both, because education and travel does open you to want to change, and for, if nothing else, for enlightened self-interest, because you know that a certain behavior of adaptability and flexibility will get you where you want to be. But then on the other hand, there's also individual or personal factor, like you were saying, Myers-Briggs, introversion, extroversion, etc. And I mean, that is obviously, sometimes you can look at infants. Some infants they cringe when you touch them, or they cry when you lift them. So that could be temperamental and somewhat genetic. And then sometimes language plays a role, and culture plays a role, because Western culture is still, or had been for 70 years, somewhat close to us in India. And if anybody who came from abroad, sort of people wanted to learn more about it. So some of us will have difficulty, others are fluent. So it's a variety of things: cultural, individual temperament, and openness.
Yeah, because even in my own family, and I see with some, some of them, they have come here for almost since 80s, 70s, 60s even. But they still want Indian food every day. They still like to mix with their own, that's a South Asian community. Is it because they feel secure, they feel, that I know this and I feel comfortable talking in Hindi, or and then that, like, crossing that boundary is harder for them, and they are very comfortable.
Yeah, I think food, as I was reading somewhere, is one of the hardest thing to give up. Italians whose family may have come 150 years ago, they still cling to Italian food. I lived in Providence for 20 years, and you see the whole Federal Hill area, and where you would feel like you were in a salumeria in Italy. And regarding tendency to stick to Indians or South Asians, not only is that common that I see, but I also see that within Indian diaspora, people stick to people, because India is basically more of a continent. So if you're from Gujarat, then you stay with people from Gujarat. But that could be because most Gujaratis are vegetarians, and maybe that inhibits them. And then if you're from South or Kerala, or you're likely to. So even within that, there's more of a what shall I say, narrowing of socializing. That's a very interesting fact, but one of the things as a psychiatrist, I know that if you have migrated abroad, you have given up your roots, you want to cling to some area of familiarity so that you feel comfortable. So socializing on weekends, speaking Bengali on weekend if you're Bengali, and eating Bengali sweets, etc. It gives you a sense that then you can go out, your batteries are recharged, and then you can deal with what the world throws at you.
Correct.
So it could be actually quite adaptive.
Okay, that's interesting. So now, last question I have, and it's a pretty serious one, and maybe interesting actually, if you look from from the person who you love is dying, or you yourself are going through something and you're afraid of death. So why are people afraid of death, or how can death be less terrifying?
Well, earlier we were talking about sex being a taboo subject among Indians. I find that death is even more of a taboo, and I think preparation for that, preparation for afterlife, and even giving people your password account or what to do afterwards, that makes family uncomfortable. I've noticed that. Among us Indians, I see that. But in general, as a psychiatrist, my interest is that, well, look, we all know we are going to die, and everybody has some terror of death at some level or another. But when you really break it down psychologically, is that people are not afraid of dying because they know they will. What they're afraid of is pain, suffocation, being uncomfortable, not being able to, just like a child who is sort of unable to convey his need or his or her need. People are afraid of that it'll be uncomfortable. So talking about it is very important. I find that that I read about, how best to control, the pain, what is the best way to control shortness of breath, nausea, which is common with cancer patients and chemotherapy, and then generally sort of saying farewell at a gradual level. That is very, very important. So I think all these things make death less terrifying. As a psychiatrist, I'm very interested in the subject.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you reach a certain point, a certain age, then you start preparing for it, like in the 80s, 90s. Okay, I've done everything. I have grandkids. They're married. There's that. All my wishes are done. Now I have a terminal cancer, so I have no choice. So you basically are mentally prepared, or even the family is mentally prepared for that. But what about in a younger setup, maybe in your 40s, 50s, and you had some terminal ill disease? Then is it also, it could sound funny, but is it your wealth or the loved ones you're leaving behind, and that's what you're terrified about?
Well, I think at a personal level, it's a very lonesome act, just like being born is. And no matter how loving a family you are, unless there's that connection, like people ought to know that, do you want to be ventilated? Do you want life support? Do you want resuscitation measures, etc.? A lot of times I'm shocked to find that the families are not sure what they want. And we should talk about our terror or fear about what it is, that if you have asthma, for example, I often hear or have heard that people are afraid of suffocating before dying, and not being relieved and suffering, etc. So in the end, it seems that people want to reduce suffering.
Correct.
Not so much the passage. I mean, that everybody has to.
One of the important things also is to have a medical will, that at
Yes.
what point your family can make a decision. If you're vegetative, that they can let you go.
Right, yeah.
That is also very important.
Like feeding tube, antibiotics use,
Correct.
ventilators, resuscitation. And so I'm very interested in that part of that. And hospice movement is new. Even here, it's only about 30 years old, but I think it ought to grow as we get older. I mean, the whole
correct.
world is getting older.
Yeah, I mean, I somewhat believed in Dr. Kevorkian's theory too, but unfortunately in this country that's illegal, and it is what it is. But I know now that some people, when they finally conclude that the brain is dead, I mean, no point. I mean, I wouldn't like to be alive. I mean, I hope my family will make a smart decision, let me go.
Let them know what you want.
It's in my will, medical
okay.
will. Yeah,
Yes,
it is actually. So it was an interesting discussion. Every topic actually can be an episode. I mean, we can have a long discussion on these, and I would love to have a follow-up discussion with Shahzad. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me over. It was a pleasure.
To end with two quotes. The purpose of psychology is to give us completely different idea of the things we know best. Paul Valery. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Shakespeare, Hamlet. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it that you joined my show, and I, like I always say in the end, life is short, be happy, and have no regrets. All the best.